You climb into a bomber. Your likelihood of returning home is 50-50. Good luck. Do that 30 times in a row and hope your luck holds out. That was the standard for Lancaster crews during World War II. They flew through walls of exploding steel. Cannon fire tore their planes apart, and engines quit over enemy territory. And yet their planes flew on. Pilots talked them back home with holes large enough to step through, wings on fire, tail sections held together by a thread. Things that should have killed everyone on board didn't. This is the story of the Avro Lancaster, the bomber that refused to go down despite whatever hell the Germans threw at it. If you're in the mood for tales of machines that defied the impossible and the men who piloted them, hit like, share this, and subscribe, because this one's different. Early in the war, Britain's bombers were bombing atrociously, and lives were being lost as a result. The Avro Manchester, meant to bomb industrial Germany, was a nightmare. Its two Rolls-Royce Vulture engines overheated constantly, seized without warning, and stranded crews struggling to return to base hundreds of miles behind enemy lines. Crews dreaded flying it. They whispered to each other in briefing rooms, describing friends who took off and were never seen again. Too many fine men were being killed in an aircraft that simply could not deliver the goods. One man refused to accept this. Avro's lead designer, Roy Chadwick, believed he could fix it. But he didn't just fix the issues. He redesigned the whole thing. Chadwick stretched the Manchester's frame, beefed up the wings and fuselage, and made one important decision that changed everything. He replaced those problematic twin engines with 4 Rolls-Royce Merlins, the same battle-proven engines that powered the Spitfire. What followed wasn't an improvement, it was a rebirth. The Avro Lancaster was born. Lancaster began flying in early 1942, and crews quickly discovered it made a huge difference. It was fast for a heavy bomber, 287 miles per hour at height. It was stable, easy to fly, and incredibly robust. But the thing that made it truly special was its ability to carry loads. Lancaster's massive 33-foot bomb compartment could accommodate everything from 4,000-pound cookie blockbusters that could level city blocks to the behemoth 22,000-pound Grand Slam, the biggest bomb of the whole war. It overnight became the workhorse of RAF Bomber Command. The Lancaster made history by making the legendary Dam Busters attack on Germany's Ruhr Valley dams during May of 1943, using Barnes-Wallis's revolutionary bouncing bombs. It bombed precise objectives across occupied Europe: submarine pens with 20-foot solid concrete roof, aircraft factories, ball bearing factories, synthetic oil refineries, and the industrial pipelines serving Hitler's war effort. Lancasters were delivering most of Bomber Command's war against Nazi Germany by 1943, but all of that power came at a brutal price. Flying a Lancaster was one of the most hazardous jobs of World War II. The statistics paint a brutal picture that's hard to comprehend, even today. Picture what each mission must have looked like. 6 to 8 hours of unrelenting fear. You'd take off from England in late afternoon, rendezvous with dozens or hundreds of other bombers, and fly to Germany. The further you traveled, the more dangerous it was. First, the flak, anti-aircraft fire that streaked the sky with burst shells, each burst spewing jagged shrapnel in all directions. Those dark puffs on old videos, each one was a sharp crack you felt in your chest, followed by the whang of metal ringing off your airplane. A single piece of metal could punch through aluminum like paper, sever a control cable, blow a gas line, or kill someone instantly. Then came the searchlights, dozens of them thrusting into darkness, probing. When they located you, you were enveloped in a cone of blinding light instantly. Every gun crew within miles could spot you. Every night, a fighter pilot could see you. To be confined was terrible. Pilots would shove their planes into hard turns and dives, anything to escape from that light, although a 30-ton Lancaster was not meant for aerobatics. And hiding in the black were German night fighters, Messerschmitt 110s and Junkers 88s, equipped with radar and up-firing cannons, referred to as Skrægge Musik, could slide under you, out of reach of your gunners, and fire upwards into your fuel tanks. Many crews never did get to see what was occurring. 1 minute flying at a level and straight, next, a fireball falls from the heavens. For the 7 men on the plane, the pilot, flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, mid-upper gunner, and rear gunner crammed into the tail, the chances were cruel and everyone knew it. More than half of Bomber Command aircrew died in action during the war, 55%. 1 in 4 survived a full tour of 30 operations. 30 sorties were the magic figure. Complete 30 and you were posted off ops, at least for the time being. But most never got close. The average was 14 sorties before you were killed, taken prisoner, or shot down too badly to fly. The Lancaster's own records tell the same dismal story. Of 7,377 Lancasters built during the war, 3,736 were lost in action, over half lost. And if your plane was hit hard so you had to bail out, your chances dropped even lower. The Lancaster escape hatches were frustratingly cramped and inconveniently located. Only 15% of crews who tried to leave planes behind actually managed to get out. Men got stuck halfway. Parachutes snagged on serrated metal. For most Lancaster crews, there was an unspoken truth. If your plane went down, you were going down with it. Survival depended on keeping that bomber in the air long enough to reach friendly airspace. And yet, here is where the Lancaster's legend was forgotten. Reputation outpaced statistics. It was regarded as a survivor, a guardian, an aircraft that flew its crews home when it should not have been flying. The stories weren't propaganda. They were true, documented accounts that circulated through RAF bases. Crews reported in genuine awe about Lancasters losing 2 engines on one side, which should make controlled flight impossible, and still making it back across the North Sea. Others came in with damage so severe that ground crews couldn't believe the aircraft stayed in the air. Holes torn through fuselages big enough to see all the way through the planes. Control surfaces torn off. Hydraulic systems were destroyed, forcing crews to manually crank the landing gear down. Fires that burned out sections before somehow being extinguished. Among the most well-known was Lancaster R5868, S for sugar. This aircraft became a legend. Time and again, S for sugar returned from Germany, positively perforated with combat damage. During one raid, the ground crew counted over 100 holes from shrapnel and bullets in the airframe. Different crews flew S for sugar on different nights, and they all described the same thing: passing through dense flak that darkened the sky, coordinated fighter attacks with tracer rounds whizzing past windows, hits that tore chunks from wings and shredded control surfaces. Fuel streamed from perforated tanks. Metal was stripped clean off the frame. Somebody had written a motto on S for sugar's flank: "No enemy plane will ever fly over this ground." It was arrogant. Almost arrogant. And wonderfully, it came to pass. S for sugar was never shot down. Towards the end of the war, it had completed 137 combat missions, more than any Lancaster. 137 times into heavily defended German airspace. 137 times back home. Now it sits in the RAF Museum in London, where you can still see patched battle scars on its hide. S for sugar wasn't alone. Lancaster, ED-888, Mike Squared, had 140 sorties with not a single crew member lost, something that contradicted every odds calculation. Different crews, different targets, variable amounts of hostile resistance. All came back alive. Another Lancaster came in from Hamburg with the rear turret blown completely off by flak. The tail gunner survived against all chance, clinging to twisted metal as his pilot flew the battered bomber home to England, almost blind to attack from behind. The pilot used instinct and the voices of surviving airmen guiding him through every turn. They made it back. These were not isolated incidents. They happened often enough that Lancasters developed a semi-mythical reputation among crews. Men genuinely believed that flying a Lancaster gave them a real hope of survival. Not a guarantee, nothing was guaranteed to survive in Bomber Command, but an even chance. The Lancaster wasn't invincible, but it was tough in the ways that mattered. It could absorb punishment that would kill other aircraft, lose an engine and still manage to fly, lose two and still make it home, suffer damage that should be fatal and remain intact just long enough to reach the coast. Again and again, it refused to quit when quitting looked inevitable. But what accorded the Lancaster its unique status was how it was reborn as an emblem of the men who flew it and the courage they carried within themselves. These were young men. They were mostly teenagers and men in their early 20s. Boys, in fact. Newly qualified pilots were suddenly entrusted with 6 other lives and a 30-ton machine in the middle of enemy country. Student navigators who had been at school a few months earlier were scheduling courses through defended airspace where a tiny mistake was terminal. Gunners, wireless operators, bomb aimers, many of them had been leading regular lives before the war. Now, they flew into hell daily. They came from all corners of the British Commonwealth and from beyond. British young men from London, Manchester, and Glasgow. Canadians from Toronto and Vancouver. Australians who'd traveled half a world to fight. New Zealanders, South Africans, Rhodesians. Free French, Polish, and Czech pilots who'd escaped occupied Europe. There were sometimes 3 or 4 different accents, different backgrounds and cultures in one crew, but totally united by trust and shared purpose. They lived together, flew together, and too often died together. The bonds were intense. These were men you trusted your life to every time you went up. The Lancaster's own endurance was the same. Burned, battered, sometimes literally on fire. It was a symbol of the grit of crews who faced impossible odds and boarded anyway because the job needed to get done. It was greater than a bomber. It was a friend, a brother in arms. Crews christened their Lancasters, adorned them with nose art, spoke to them and one another in their presence as if they were sentient, and the Lancaster brought them home. It was a relationship based on trust, proven and forged in the worst of conditions. The Lancaster symbolized something important, that you could be hurt, stretched to the limits, and continue going, that you could survive even when everything was on fire. That bravery wasn't about fearlessness. Each man on a Lancaster crew was afraid, but about doing it despite that, about having faith in your plane, your crew, and yourself to carry it through. By May 1945, when the war finally came to an end, Lancasters had completed 156,000 sorties and dropped more than 608,000 tons of bombs. They'd bombed the industrial heartland of Nazi Germany and contributed to the fall of the Third Reich. Those are the figures that go into textbooks. But behind every sortie were 7 men. Behind every mission home, a pilot is teasing crumbling engines through a Black Sea. A navigator bringing them on course when lost and low on fuel. Gunners who stayed at their posts with fire blazing around them. Engineers are extracting a few more minutes from dying systems. Wireless operators are sending out distress calls and bringing crews back home safe. Bomb aimers laying back in vulnerable noses through flak and fighters. Rear gunners alone for hours in cramped turrets, looking for the fighter that might be the last. The Avro Lancaster was not just a weapon. Steel and fire forged into determination. Hope with wings, the embodiment of a simple truth. Sometimes when everything assures you that you will fall, you just keep flying anyway. The Lancaster created its legend through thousands of missions, in which it brought shattered men back home in a shattered plane that somehow, against all odds, still flew. It was and will forever be remembered as the bomber that refused to die. If this story moved you, if it reminded you what courage really looks like, hit like, share this, and subscribe for more true stories from World War II. Until next time, remember the Lancaster and the men who refused to give in.